Yo, what's up you guys? It's time to go ahead and jump right into part 2 of the series where I teach you how to build your piece control map. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to build your pregame, and then we're also going to be setting up our team picker room. And last but not least, I'm going to show you how to start the setup of your team holding rooms. This is going to be a long one, so don't forget you can pause anytime you need to throughout the tutorial. If you're just popping in and you missed the first tutorial, don't worry, the links will be posted below, so be sure to check it out. In addition to that, don't forget to subscribe, that way you don't miss more tutorials like this to help you build more games. Alright you guys, let's go ahead and get right into it. Let's go. Now that we got the background mechanics out the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the localized mechanics and check it out. Now in your pregame, you can include info on how to play your game, social info, and more, so be sure to take advantage of it. In addition to that, since we're not using the island settings for a countdown, we have a timer here that will be counting down before the game starts. We're going to use this timer to enable a Mutator Zone and teleport all the players. Let's take a look at the settings. I have duration set to 7 seconds, but you can have this longer if you like. The timer name is Pregame Countdown. It's going to be counting down. Start the timer at game start is on. Activating team is any. Allowed class is any. Applies to everyone. Reset timer if failing team or class check is off. Disable timer if failing team or class check is off. Result on timer in a success. Completion behavior is reset. Visible during game is yes. The timer color is white. Display time in minutes and seconds. I don't have anything for timer not started text. The timer running text will say starting in. Pause text is empty. Success score value is 0, and so on. This will show on the HUD, and the label style is bold. Save timer is don't save. Urgency mode is never. Urgency text is empty. Audio effects is on, but there's no urgency mode, so nothing will display there. If instigating player is not present, pick a random player, and the display score update on HUD is off. Alright, so let's take a look at functions, and you can see that there's nothing there. And for events, we have on success, we're going to send an event to the Mutator Zone device to enable. This will allow the players to be transported to the team picker area. And we're also going to disable matchmaking so that no more players can matchmake into the session. So we're doing this to keep the experience clean, and we're going to implement the system that will enable and disable matchmaking by the round. And you'll see I also have within the pregame area is a player counter, which is used to show players how many players have spawned. Before we take a look at that, let's take a look at the round settings device. And let's see here, I have rounds set to all, enabled on minigame start, enabled. Don't override with keep items between rounds, and so on. Clear all items on class reset is yes. Reset current vitals on class reset is yes. Wood given per round, none, and so on. Last standing wins is don't override, and disable matchmaking on round end is off because we're going to be using our own system. As for functions, we have enable matchmaking when the first player spawns into the game, and we're going to disable when the timer counts down in the pregame. Now I do have map indicators here, and this is just for tutorial purposes. However, you can use them in your map if you like. So we won't go over that, but let's take a look here at the player counter. Now this player counter does not transmit. It's just for display purposes only. So when the players spawn in, they can see how many players are in the lobby. So let's take a look here at the settings. I have compare player count equal or fewer. Target player count is 4. Compare at game start is no. Compare on count change is no. Transmit on player counted every time. Transmit for on compare result change, last instigator. Counted team is any. Invert team selection off. Counted class is any. Invert class selection off. Enabled in phase always. Full panel visible on. And you can choose whatever icon scale you like. Color and icon as well. I do have this set to in a zone, and it's a cylinder shape. Time and zone to count is set to 0. Zone visible during game is no. Size units is tiles. Zone width is a 3.8. Again, this is optional. And zone offset up and down is 0. Let's go ahead and take a look at the functions, and we can see here there's not anything there, as well as events. Alright, so you're going to need some pre-game spawn pads as well, so let's go ahead and take a look at those. I have it enabled during phase pre-game only, player team any, player class any, priority group don't override, use as island start is on, visible in-game is off, visible in-game is off, play audio is no, enemy range check is 0.0, and let's see, this part doesn't really quite matter, display enemy range is 1 near. There's no functions, but we do have some events going on here. And specifically for the first player spawn pad, which is player spawner pregame 1, we have the class selector global going off to change the player to the team. And also it's going to enable matchmaking so that matchmaking can begin at the start of the game. On the other player spawn pads, we just have it to change the players to team, as you see here. And there we go. Alright, so that's going to conclude the pregame area. So let's go ahead and move on to the next area, which is where they pick their teams. Alright, so let me go ahead and break down what's going on here. You want to try to give players enough time to choose a team. And we're going to use the player reference device to display which team a player chose. Alright, so the class selector will allow players to switch teams, and each team will have a max of 1 player. In addition to that, if the player does not choose a team in time, they will be sent to the game end area so they can matchmake our way. So let's go ahead and break down the devices you guys see here, so you can see how it's working. So you guys see I do have 2 timers. One is for display only. It doesn't send any events or anything like that. It just displays the time. And the one in the background is the same as this, except it does send events and so on. So let's take a look at this one first. I have a duration of 30 seconds. The timer name is choose a team. The direction is a countdown. Start timer at game start is off. Activating team is any. Allowed class is 3. Applies to everyone. Reset timer if failing team or class check. Disable timer if failing team or class check is off. Result on timer in is success. Completion behavior is reset. Visible during game is yes. The color is red. Display time in minutes or seconds. Timer not started text is not there. We have a timer running text that says please choose a team. Pause text is empty. Success score value is 0, as well as score per second remaining. Show on HUD is no. The label is bold. We're not going to save the timer. The urgency mode is never. Urgency text is empty. Audio effects is on. If instigating player is not present, I'm going to pick a random player. And display score update on HUD is off. Let's check out the functions. So we're going to start when receiving from teleporter TP1. which is Team Picker, on Teleported, and this will complete when the game ends. So when a player's teleported to the game end teleporter, it's going to complete this timer. Alright, so we do have disable when receiving from, and that's when the game starts and Team 2 is teleported on Teleported. Alright, so I just wanted to add real quickly that you can also disable when receiving from Teleporter Game Start Team 1 as well as Teleporter Game Start Team 2. In addition to that, if you want to start a revolving game, keep in mind this tutorial is not set for a revolving game, so if you want to do that, you want to make sure that you start the timer again when they come back from the game end area, as well as enable it at the same time. That way this timer can be re-enabled and can start the process again. Now let's go ahead and take a look at events. On success, we're going to send an event to the Mutator Zone. Did not choose a team, and we're going to enable that zone, and that's because if there's still a player that's in this lobby and they have not picked a team yet, we want them to be teleported to the area that will let them know they haven't chose a team and they need to match make into another game. Alright, so this is the second timer, and it's just for display only. One of the major differences is you want to make sure that it shows on HUD, and it's also going to start when the players are teleported to this area. And then on success, this is going to disable itself, that way it no longer shows on the HUD. In this area we have one teleporter, and this is where players will be teleported to. And let's take a look here. We have teleporter group none, teleporter target group is none, enable during phase all, team is all, teleporter rift is not visible, play visual effects is yes, play sound effects is yes, conserve momentum is yes, face player and teleporter direction is yes, effects class all but selected, selected class is none, effect radius is off, maintain relative position is yes, skydive after teleport is no, and what we're going to do here in functions is teleport when receiving from the Mutator Zone device when the player enters the zone, and Mutator Zone rematch when player enters the zone. When they go in for a rematch and the game is done, they'll be transported back here. In addition to that, we do have some events here. When it is teleported, it's going to enable and disable a few devices. And there's quite a few here. The class Selector for Team 1 will enable. The Mutator for the game ending will disable. The timer device for them to choose a team will start. And again, the timer device that's not going to be displayed for them to choose a team will also start, and it will be working in the background. We're also going to enable some player counters here. We have the player counter for Team 2. The class Selector for Team 2 will both enable. We're also going to trigger at game start, and this will be enabled when receiving from. Mutator Zone round end will disable, and Mutator Zone game end 2 will also disable. So all those events are happening at the same time here. In addition to that, we have player reference devices, and this will display as soon as the player goes into the zone to switch their team. So let's take a look at Team 1 first. I have show hologram is on, the color is sky blue, the hologram effect is 100%, visible during game is on, hologram animation is idle, show base is off, show player details is mid player, player details curve amount is no curve, the stat to track is none, the track game total for stats is no, update registered player is always, Activated by sequencers is on. Registered by sequencers is on. Show activate without player reference is no. And play audio is yes. We're going to register the player when receiving from class selector team 1 when the team is switched, and then player counter team 1 when the player is counted. We're also going to clear the player when the tracker elims round tracker is complete, and that means that all rounds have complete and the game has ended. That way, if they do choose to rematch and they come back through, they'll start on a clean slate. And you see there are no events. For Team 2 player reference, we have the color red-orange. The hologram is on. Hologram effect is 100%. It will be visible during game. The hologram animation is idle. The base is off. Show player details mid-player. Player detail curve amount is no curve. Stat to track is none. Track game total for stats is no. Update registered player is always. Activated by sequencers is on. Registered for sequencers is on. Allow activate without player reference is no. And play audio is no. We're going to register the player when they go into the team selector. And that's class selector team 2 on team switched, and player counter in the weapon room on player counted. Now this is just a fail safe here. Then we have clear player when receiving from, again, the round tracker on complete. And there you go. Now we also have, let's see here, the class selectors, and this is what they go in to switch their teams in their class. So let's look at team 1. Class to switch to is 1. Team to switch to is team 1. Activating team is any. Time to switch is instant. Respawn player on switch, no. Restore health and shields on switch, yes. Clear items on switch is class items only. Size of volume is 1 meter. Volume visible in game is on. Visible during game is off. Accent color is aqua. And it is enabled during game phase, gameplay only. There is activation audio, but there is no zone audio. Display the effects on activation is yes. And let's take a look at functions. We have enable when receiving from teleporter 1, and that's on teleported. Again, that's when they come to the team picker area on teleported. And then we have a few events. On class switch, we're going to go ahead and teleport them to the weapon area for their team. And I've named that teleporter WP RM Team 1-1. So that basically stands for Teleporter Weapon Room Team 1, 1 player. If there's 2 players, it'll be a 1-2. Now when the team is switched, we're going to register the player on the player reference device. We're going to enable the player spawner in Team 1, which is going to be in the weapon room. And then we're also going to enable the Team 1-2 player spawner. That means there's 2 spawners there in the weapon room. And then we're going to teleport them to the weapon room once the team is switched. Team 2 class selector is very similar, with the exception that they're going to be teleported to a teleporter just for their team, and it's named again Team 2 instead of Team 1. We also have some more differences here where the class will be switched to class 2 and the team will be switched to Team 2. I'll go ahead and slowly go down these so you can see they are very similar. Again, this will be enabled once they come into this area, and that's when they're teleported. And then on class switch, we're going to enable their spawner, which will be player spawner team, and then player spawner team 2, and that should be a team 2 there. I just didn't put that there. And then 2-1 and 2-2, that's what that should be there. Teleporter weapon room team 2, they'll teleport. Then on team switched, we're going to go ahead and enable the player spawner that's in their area, and enable the player spawner devices because there's 2 spawners in that area. Alright, let's go ahead and look at the player counters, starting with team 1. So I have it set to compare player count equal or fewer, and I have it set to 0 players. This is because when they enter the room, the count's going to go up by 1. It's going to increment, showing the players that are still here how many players are on that team. Compare at game start is no. Compare on count change is yes. Transmit on player counter every time. Transmit for on compare result change last instigator. The counted team is any. The invert team selection is off. The counted class is any. The invert class selection is off. Enabled on phase is always. Info panel is visible. Icon scale is a 1.0. Info panel icon is player icon. The base color is whatever you like. This is using a zone and it's a cylinder. And timing zone to count is instant. Zone visible during game is no. The units is set to tiles, and of course this is all optional, and so on. As for functions, we're going to increment target player count when receiving from the player counter in the weapon room. So when they go into the weapon room, it's going to increment this by 1, showing that there's 1 player in that room. And then lastly, events we have on player counted. We're going to send the event to the player reference device to register the player. As for team 2, player counter is exactly the same. Compare player count is equal or fewer. Target player count is 0. Compare at game start is no. Compare on count change is yes. Transmit on player counted is every time. Transmit for on compare result change is last instigator. Counted team is 2. Invert team selection is off. Counted class is any. Invert class selection is off. Enabled on phase is always. Info panel is on. Icon scale is whatever you like. Gonna use the zone and cylinder and shape it however you like there, and everything is kind of the same there. The only difference is we're going to increment target player count when they go into team 2's weapon room, and there's a player counter in there as well, and it's going to increment this counter by 1 once the player is counted. Alright, so that does it for the team picker room. Let's move on to each individual area, and I can show you guys what's going on there. Alright, so we're going to start right here in the middle section, and I have a few timers here, some triggers and more timers, so lots of things going on. So as soon as they come into the room, we have to ensure there's enough players so the game starts. So let's run some checks. We do this by running a timer that compares players against the count. So just to explain how everything's working, when the teams are teleported to their holding rooms, the player counters are going to compare both rooms to ensure there's enough players before they proceed to the game level. So for this tutorial, when a player is teleported to one room, let's say it's team 1, then the timer is going to be running checks, and every few seconds it's going to be comparing to see if there's enough players in the opposite room before it sends the player to the game. Now there has to be at least 1 player in each room for the checks to be successful. If there isn't, then the player that's waiting in one room is going to be transferred to the game end area because there's not enough players. Now what's so sensitive about this system is you want to ensure there's enough time for these circumstances to happen. And what I mean by that is if you're checking for opponents, if your time is too short, then it may send them to the game early, and you'll have one player inside the level without someone to battle. So we want to do our best to prevent that by running a series of checks as best as we can. Of course, we cannot account for every variable. There could be many. However, do your best to set your timers at an adequate amount of time so that it's not too long, but then not too short as well. Now you see I do have two timers. I have a timer for team 1 that's checking against team 2, and a timer for team 2 that's checking against team 1. And that's in case someone goes into team 2 before someone goes into team 1, and they're here first, then it's going to check here. So let's go ahead and take a look at them both. They kind of work the same, but we'll go through each setting so you can see what they look like. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at opponent checks for team 1 against team 2. I have it set at 10 seconds for this tutorial. The timer name there, of course, you see there on the screen. Timer direction is a countdown. Start timer at game start is off. Activating team is any. Allowed class is 1. Applies to the player. Reset timer if failing team or class check is off. Disable timer if failing team or class check is off. Result on timer end is success. Completion behavior is stop. Visible during game is yes. Timer color is white. Display time in minutes or seconds. We don't have anything for timer not started text. Timer running text is checking for opponents. Pause text is empty. There's no score value or penalty or second remaining. Show on HUD is yes. And we have it set to bold for the text style. Save timer is don't save. Urgency mode is never. Audio effects is on. If instigating player is not present, it's a random player. And we don't have anything for display score. Update on HUD. This timer will start when team 1 is teleported to their weapon room. And this is going to be disabled when game starts. So we have a trigger that's going to be keeping track of when the player's coming into the room. And once it's triggered, it's going to disable this device. For events on success, we're going to go ahead and compare the players to the target. So this is going to compare players to target from the player counter that's in Team 2's weapon room. Alright, so this timer is somewhat similar. We have allowed class 2 for Team 2. And I'll just kind of go down here so you guys can see. And as for functions, it's going to start when Team 2 is teleported into their weapon room. And again, disable when trigger game starts and when it's triggered. On success, it's going to compare players to target, and it's going to compare it to Team 1's player counter in their room. So when we have a successful count, the game is going to start. And a timer will display that the game is going to start. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we do need a trigger to keep count, start a timer, and transport if there are at least 2 players. So here's the timer. This is for 30 seconds, so they have to wait 30 seconds before the game starts. It's going to count down. It has allowed class any. Activating team is also any. Applies to everyone. And I'll just scroll down here so you guys can see. Result on timer end is success. Completion behavior is stop. Visible during game is yes. The timer running text is starting game. Show on HUD is yes. Timer label text style is bold. Urgency text is get ready. We have it to start when trigger game start is triggered. And on success, we have quite a lot of things going on. So we do have a build reset, and the explosives will go off on success. And this is because if they're coming from another round, you want to make sure they have a clear place to play. We're going to show a Hud message letting them know the game has started. We're going to enable the Mutator Zone in the team weapon area for Team 2, as well as Team 1. Again, more explosive devices there for the build reset. And that's it. We have 2 triggers and they're for different events. This is for the first round, and this is for every other round. So let's take a look here at the first one. Activating team is any, allowed class any, triggered by player on, triggered by damage off, triggered by items off, triggered by vehicles on. Again, these are default settings. What you really want to look at is activate on game phase will be set to none. Times can trigger is infinite. Transmit every trigger is going to transmit every 2 times it's triggered, and that'll be counting for each player coming through. Delay will be none. Reset delay is none. Trigger sound is disabled, and so on. It's visible in game because it's so far away. Receive damage while invisible is do not take damage. Enabled on game start is disabled, and that's because we're going to be enabled when receiving from teleporter 1 at the very beginning. When they come in to pick their team, it's going to be enabled, and we're going to trigger it when receiving from the player counter. So when they come in, a player is counted, it's going to trigger once, and then when team 2 comes in, a player is counted, it's going to trigger twice, which will cause this to trigger. Since we also have another round coming through, we have it triggering when game is in progress, when they teleport there for team 1 and team 2. And then on the player spawners too, we have to account for those. If they come in, let's say they did not do well on the round and they spawn in, they're going to be spawning in on player spawner pads for their team. So that has to also be accounted for, and make sure it contributes to the trigger as well. So there's 2 spawn pads in each area for each team. In addition to that, when it is triggered, we're going to send an event to disable the timer device that says they should choose a team. We're also going to disable the timer for opponent checks for both. And then we're going to start the timer device that's going to say game is started. Alright, so this trigger is for when the game is in progress. We have activating team any, allowed class any, triggered by player is on, triggered by damage is off, triggered by items is off, and it's kind of the same as the other one. This is going to transmit every 2 times it's triggered. There will be no delay. And again, the same as the last one. There are a few differences though in functions. Here we have enabled when receiving from the game in progress teleporter only. And then we're going to disable when receiving from the weapon room teleporter when they're teleported, and the weapon room teleporter team 2 unteleported. And that is because we don't want this to be counting on the first round, but only the second round. This is going to trigger when receiving from player counter, just like before, and everything else is the same there compared to the other. And then when it is triggered, we're going to send an event to disable the round end and start the game in process timer. And when it's triggered, we're going to send an event to disable the Mutator Zone for the round to end and start the game in progress timer. In addition to that, they're going to receive a message that says go when the game has started. And this will be the triggering player. It's going to display for 3 seconds for this tutorial. And let's see here. Again, everything else from here on is optional. And it's going to show when receiving from the timer device when it's starting the game, and the timer device when the game is in progress. Again, these won't be displaying at the same time. They're happening at different instances in the game. So we have 2 timers here, and one is for waiting for players, the other is starting game. And this is when the game is in progress. So let me dive in and tell you the importance of this system. So when the players are battling it out, there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. Now, when the winner wins, they're going to be teleported really fast. But when the loser loses, they're going to be eliminated and it's going to take them time to respawn in. So this system provides a buffer allowing that time. That way the player counter can account for them when they get back. If the eliminated player decides to leave the match and rage quits, then the player that's waiting in the holding room will be teleported to the game end area where they can decide to either matchmake into another game or do whatever they want to do. So let's go ahead and take a look here. This is for 15 seconds. We're going to wait for players, but you can set it to longer depending on the respawn time. We have a countdown. Activating team is any. Allowed class is any. Applies to everyone. Result on timer in is success. Completion behavior is stop. Visible during game is yes. Timer color is yellow. Again, more optional choices here. The running text is waiting for players. This will show on the HUD. It will be bold and we're not going to save the timer. There's no audio effects and we're going to pick a random player if instigating player is not present. As for functions, it's going to start when game in progress. Teleporters, when the player is teleported to their area. We also need to enable it, so it's going to be enabled when receiving from when the player is counted. And disable it when they are teleported to the game start area, which is when the level starts. For events, we have quite a few things. Again, we have the event to clear the area, so we have some build reset events here with the explosive device. We're going to compare the player to target just to make sure there's a player there, and so on. So once all those checks are passed, it's going to show starting game and the game will start within 5 seconds. Activating team is any, allowed class is any. This applies to everyone. The result on timer in is success. It's going to stop when it's complete. It will be visible during game with the color of yellow. It will say starting game. I duplicated this and changed the settings, so let me go ahead and update that to starting game. It will show on HUD. It'll be bold. We're going to pick a random player if the instigating player is not present. As for functions, we're going to start when receiving from trigger game start to when it's triggered. And as for events, on success, we're going to make sure the builds are reset. Show the HUD message showing that the game has started. Enable the Mutator Zone for game start, which will teleport the players to the area they need to go to. And that's going to be for both teams because there's a Mutator Zone in both areas to enable. And so on. Whoa, did you guys catch the part where I was losing my voice almost? That was a long one. Let me leave you guys with a quick tip. You can actually skip the team holding area and have the players go straight to game level. Alright you guys, that's going to do it for part 2. Please stay tuned for part 3 while we solidify this amazing tutorial and you guys can build your game. I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me today, and I do hope I see you on the next one. Bye!